I don't know, I'll give people a second to come back from snacking, maybe? Or not, I guess we can just start. So my name is Ben Sisto, and I'm an artist living in New York. I became involved with this panel because I was at Open Video Conference, and I was walking through a hallway, and I heard some chatter about the rapper Little B, and I was like, what is this butterfly in my ear? So I followed it, and I met Mian as a result. And he very promptly invited me to be here, so I hope that was a wise decision. I'm primarily an event producer living in New York. I book nightclubs for a living and make visual art on the side, which sort of unintentionally has started to integrate issues of fair use and copyright. And I think this is going to be a really nice panel. We have people working in a wide range of mediums and not specifically thinking about copyright. It's just everyone's practices kind of involves these issues. So we're going to each do a small presentation and then kind of do panel talk. And during the panel talk, it's kind of open Q&A. Feel free to raise your hand if you want to interject. We want it to, in the spirit of the day, be very participatory. So we're going to start with Dan Lynch, who for 18 years has been a member of Negativland. And he's going to be talking about some paintings he's been doing and the process of them. So please welcome Dan.
Hello. How's it look? My name's Dan Lynch. I've been what I call myself as a satellite member of Negativland, not really in the core, kind of flying around them, doing the visual side of Negativland for the last 18 years, while they were getting into trouble, getting sued by YouTube's label, and stuff like that. And I was a fan of Negativland in the 80s and wrote them some crazy letter in the 90s, and they called me back, and that's how it all happened. But for all my life, I've been an artist, and the way I've always done art is to go out in the world and find things and think, gee, that's neat, cut it out of a magazine or wherever I found it, maybe take a picture of it, stick it in an envelope, put it in a file cabinet for later reference. This is the analog way of doing it, and then when the digital world happened, I would take photos, have them developed, scan them, and then use those. Then the internet came into the scene, and I would start typing in search terms and getting images, and I like to use images very carefully and use minute portions of them as a part of a whole. So this painting you see on the left there is made out of dozens and dozens and dozens of things I've found on the internet, things I've photographed, things I've drawn. It's from all over the place. It's essentially a collage, but the net result is something that is pretty much a painting because it's also painted. So there's phases. So I will tell you the story about how this painting and the three others that go with it that are out in the lobby happened. In 2003, I got what I call an art machine. It's really just a gigantic printer. It's an Epson 9600. It was relatively cheap. It was only $5,000. And back in those days, I was like, holy tamale, these things would cost $10,000 million, not $5,000. So, I managed to get one. And the other cool thing about it is it has archival inks, so they don't fade. So we don't want to make art that fades. It's really bad. So it's good that this doesn't fade. So a few years later, my buddy Negativland, the founder, Mark Hosler, came visiting me in Massachusetts. And there he is. Hi, Dan. Hi, Mark. And he says, show me this place. And so I took him to Harvard, showed him Harvard Yard. We went to Sudbury, and he held a gun with a Minuteman. And we went to this place in Sudbury called the Wayside Inn, which was built in 1716. And being from California, I love these old buildings in New England. They just blow my mind because everything in California is about an hour old. And so this is really cool. And I wanted him to see that. And we went in there, and That's my wife and daughter there with him. You know, we had drinks, that table they're sitting on. George Washington did something there some time ago. And so my love of old buildings, I wandered off with my camera because to me a camera is a sampler for collecting bits to use later. I don't really think of it at all as something to take pictures with, although it obviously is. I think of it as a handheld high-resolution sampler. So, 290-year-old room, that's pretty cool. Then I went to the next room, the dining room in the Sudbury Wayside Inn, and I happened on this scene. And I took that picture. And then I went back and had more drinks with Mark. Hang on. So, now we're in the mood. A few years later, after this was a few years ago that we were in that room, and about a year ago, Negativland was doing an upcoming show in Houston, an art show. And Mark called me and said, Dan, what are you going to do? I don't know. So I went through all these images. I keep my favorite images in a folder on my Mac, and I happened across that picture of the ladies with the red hats. And the only thing I thought at that point was, gee, it'd just be nice if their hats were bigger. That's it. That's all I'm thinking. And so, go to Google. That's an interesting hat. And well, now I'll show you kind of the method. So the first part is you trim the hat out from its background, and then you do a composite. So this is a composite of a bunch of stuff, not just the hat and the lady's face, but you can see, this is basic Photoshop. And, and then the next phase is digital painting, where I move it out of Photoshop into Painter, Corel Painter, and you can blend the pixels as though they're all wet and oily, like they're watercolors or acrylics. And then back into Photoshop to finish it, add more texture. Then it goes to the art machine, it gets printed. And then, never satisfied with a print, I started putting textures on it, metallic pigments, and acrylics. And that's kind of the method. So what follows is just more examples of sort of serendipity, as I would call it, just wandering around the digital forest, looking for things to eat. And so here's another example of a kind of morphing from the original image to painted version. Pampas grass. I don't think people make hats out of it, but you can do it digitally, and kind of thought these were kind of cool. Shows you how it gets integrated into the painting. So the last frame of these animations is always the actual painting. Then after doing these hats, just making the hats bigger, I kind of thought, who are these people? I mean, these women wearing these red hats in this room. So, kind of in a similar vein, it's serendipity again. You just go to the web and you find out. So it turns out there's the Red Hat Society, silly me, I didn't know about them. There's a Wikipedia page about them. And so, kind of what I got out of it was like, well, okay, it's a group of women who are over 50. You have to be 50 or older to belong. They're past their fertile years, kind of by definition, most of them. They're kind of eccentric because you see them out in public wearing red hats, and like I'm being eccentric right now, wearing a red hat in front of all of you. And they're kind of proud. They're kind of saying, "I'm old, and I'm in your face about it." And they're, instead of like piling on the Maybelline. And so I thought they were kind of really interesting people, and where I read about them, and so I ran with it. And so I got into this idea of like the whole post-fertility thing. And so I thought eggs were an appropriate way to find a metaphor for fertility. And so back to Google, and I found this egg. Thought it was very nice, and the egg winds up on fire in a nest in the fireplace of the room that I took a picture of 3 years earlier. And when I talk about serendipity, this is a good example of it. So I was looking for more eggs, and then I saw this. and a plate of deviled eggs. And this is one of those cool moments that happens a lot on the internet as you're just stumbling around. It's like I didn't look for deviled eggs. They just presented themselves to me, and I kind of thought, it's really interesting. Like these women are dining on symbols of fertility, and I got to do it. So I did it. And then I started thinking about who these women are, being older people. A lot of them are way over 50 years old. And I think as the older you get, the more you're more interested in your ancestors and where you're from and your family. So I looked up some tintype photos from the 1840s, and I found some interesting faces. And these faces got integrated into the painting. Another example is this is the floor hat. This is a photo I took that day that I wanted in there, and it's not always from Google. Sometimes it's my own stuff too. It's just whatever I can find, wherever I can find it, and I try and not limit myself with whether or not I take the photos or whether or not they're on the internet. And the rest of what follows is the 4 paintings that I did. So this is kind of the whole painting happening in front of you from the beginning to the end. It just happens bit by bit, and it's very kind of organic, the whole process. So it's more like what you're seeing here is a creative journey that I've taken. I didn't set out to do this image, but when I look at it there on the easel, I almost can't believe I made it. And I know I didn't, in a way, conceive of it. I just stumbled into it bit by bit. And the internet is a huge part of that. It's a part of the creative process. It's like an idea machine. Once I had that image, I was like, well, wouldn't it be cool if the hats were like made out of stuff that pertain to these women's life? So I found all these things that might be fragments of their life from their pasts, and with the intention of building literally and digitally their hats out of this stuff. So this is an example of one lady's hat being built out of the stuff you just saw there. Gets relit, gets retexturized, context is changed. The original context of all the original stuff I found online is stripped away. So, I'm imagining maybe like the married couple there in the middle from a wedding cake. Maybe she always wanted to get married and didn't, or maybe she got married and divorced, or maybe her husband died, maybe she's happily married. I don't know, but it's part of her story. Once I had those two, I thought, well, where's this room? And so I wanted to zoom out instead of zoom in on the red hat ladies. And next to that wayside inn where I took the picture is this little shack where Mary Had a Little Lamb happened to have been written in 1830 about a girl named Mary Sawyer. And I kind of thought, I can see that room in there, with the red hat ladies. So that's the next painting kind of happening in front of your eyes. And, I have more metaphor. I got the hats up there in the tree with glowing eggs in them. And, the eggs are actually a website that sells paper lanterns, and one of them was egg-shaped. And then the last thing I was like, well, where is the shack? So I wanted to zoom out one level more, and I decided this one's kind of weird. It's just like a universe full of eggplants with red hats orbiting them, and the little shacks on top, which is the next scene. So what these are is really 4 views onto one scene. First you have the kind of macro view with the egg verse, and then you zoom in on that little house on top of the egg, and that's where that is, and then you go into the room, and that's where that is, and then you go into that one lady's hat, and that's what that is. And I originally thought I was going to do like 8 zooms, get like down to the atomic level of one lady's hat, which I may yet do. Can anyone say that? I can't. I think it's tetrapic. There's diptychs, or 2 paired paintings, and there's triptychs, or 3 paired paintings. 4 paired paintings are that. And so they're meant to go in that particular order because of the zoom level. So now I'm thinking I've done this crazy art, and I happen to have a wife who writes really well, and her name is Stanzi, and I said, you know, why don't you tell me what I've done, why don't you tell me what it all means, and write something about it. And she did do that, and there is a book in a magazine that you can buy online at a reasonable price that goes with all this imagery, this fantastic imagery that my wife wrote. And so now, you know, what I used to call egg verse, and Mary Had a Little Lamb, she actually turned those into chapters in the book, and it's very, very fascinating. So serendipity happens everywhere. You know, in the old days, in the 1970s and 80s, I used to collect a lot of physical things for using later. I still do, but it's been supplanted by my usage of the internet. A lot of it's Google, but a lot of it isn't, as a way to stumble around creatively and see what I might find. Thank you.
We're just going to do a quick swap, but while I do that, I'll just introduce our other two panelists. John Rafman is an artist from Canada, so he is concerned with our international copyright law issues. He has work up right now at the New Museum in New York as part of their free show, and he holds a BFA from the Art Institute in Chicago. And Joshua Caleb Weibley is an artist from New York. He focuses on a lot of drawing, and actually is going to be featured in an upcoming show at the Drawing Center, and he has just graduated the Cooper Union. So this talk is called Cats Rule Everything Around Me, and this is actually just a funny lol image that Josh made. I don't know if anyone's aware of the painter Alex Katz, but I recommend looking him up. He's a favorite among artists. So we're going to get started with John, if you want to come on up. And it looks like this isn't, it's not showing up here.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody. So I'm going to begin my talk. I'm going to go pretty quickly, but after this, after the whole conference, I'm going to be giving a tour of Second Life with my Kool-Aid Man avatar, so if you have any questions, feel free to hold them till then too. So usually, there was a quote I was thinking about by T.S. Eliot that's probably the most obvious one that I think an artist who's thinking about fair use might come to mind. It's an oft-quoted line. He said that immature poets borrow, but great poets steal. But instead, I decided to use this one instead because my work, and I think a lot of my peers' work, has to do, just with making art that's kind of being critical and expressing our contemporary reality, the modern world. And it's nothing, and this kind of relates to also your process too. It's not the fragmentation that exists in modern reality is not that new. I mean, it's been going on for hundreds of years with the rise of modernity. It's just that with the internet now, it's kind of reached this extreme, like almost, it's taken the initial fragmentation that occurred with city life, but taking it to the next level where you're literally bombarded by completely different, fragments of a news story to a puppy dog rolling around to just like completely unrelated, from the minute to minute, from day to day. So the quote goes, "The ordinary man's experience is chaotic. Irregular, fragmentary. The latter falls in love or reads Spinoza, and these two experiences or with the noise of the typewriter, weekend, the smell of cooking, in the mind of the poet. However, these experiences are constantly forming new holes for the artist." Now, my particular, I'm going to show you a couple projects that relate to this quote, in that my practice, at least my recent practice, started kind of out of my constant surfing the internet. In a way, both these projects that I'm going to show come directly from just this constant kind of trolling through websites, not necessarily looking for anything specific, but just kind of processing it all and trying to let what you experience through the process of surfing kind of overtake you, and then within that trying to look kind of at things that might be going unnoticed, and then maybe taking them and recontextualizing them, framing them, juxtaposing them against something in a way that forms something new or critical. The first project is called 9 Eyes of Google Street View, and in it I basically spent, and it's been going on for 3 years now, so I've been spent countless hours surfing Google Street View, basically pulling out just interesting finds, images that I either have like striking content that is pretty obvious, you know, why it's striking, or something that I might just find beautiful from compositionally or in terms of color, its formal qualities. And in a way, for me, it was a return to just classic street photography in a way, because I had found that like street photography nowadays, or photojournalism, had lost some of the authenticity, or I don't know, spontaneity or immediacy that was found in, you know, early 20th century street photography. Yet within the Google Street View images, there somehow it was re-imbued with that immediacy, and I think it had something to do with just the vast, this epic nature of the project that Google started. Just the fact that all these images had been captured completely by chance by this roving Google camera that was, I don't know, just happened to pass by this dramatic moment or this pensive moment, or whether the subject, or, I mean, it's ambiguous whether she's naked, but yeah, nudist moment. And I think in the images, so at first I just saw like Google Street View, again, something that it paralleled what just my general everyday internet surfing, in that it was a rich mine of material, it provided me a rich mine of material to make new work out of. But then and in a way I could find photographs that would be able to evoke every various photographic styles, from early docu-photography of, let's say, the Farm Security Bureau, where you find images of like Americana, and just that maybe images that you wouldn't necessarily see in a glossy magazine, or also maybe more surrealist or poetic images. But then upon further, you know, so I kind of attributed these images to have certain, I don't know, almost because they weren't photographed by a photographer, but because of the nature of them being captured by this robotic camera that had no other motivation other than gathering information for Google and its new feature on Google Maps, Google Street View. This a certain like weight that it gave back to what it was capturing, back to the reality it was capturing. But then upon even further, like I guess looking at it from a more critical artistic point of view, I felt like the images revealed something about just the nature of modernity in a way. So you had this tension between this Google camera, or this roving robotic gaze that just is capturing everything and nothing's connected. Like it looks at everything as just information, and it's only connected through geospatial contiguity. And then there's my gaze, or anybody's gaze, the human gaze, the interpretive gaze that's giving meaning, that's attributing narratives to these images. And within that gaze, I felt like it kind of was, in a way, you'd have this indifferent being, which was Google. Everything's information, utilitarian, and then the human gaze, which is one that is interpretive and artistic and is curating and is telling stories and finds meaning. So I found in that tension also something very important to, or significant. I can talk about that more, but I'll just move along. Here's a couple more images. So yeah, one last point, I guess, is that, you know, Google has a little thing in the bottom, report a problem. But which I also found is another, like, just you analyzing these various, I don't know, little ephemera or details that may go unnoticed. I think just in general, even like the side of a banner on a website, or just certain things that, I guess the minutia of daily life, you can, I think, reveal something from a micro level onto a macro level. So in a way, just like you can't really see it here, but every image there's a little report problem. But something about that was striking to me, because it's like, how can you truly report your concern for humanity by pressing a button? So let's say you see like a baby abandoned on the street, or like a prostitute on the side of the highway or something like that. There's this sense that there truly is this true alienation, where maybe once you could call a cop to tell if you saw somebody being harassed on the side of the road. But now we've reached the level where it's this, like, first of all, it's already happened. We don't know when this happened. And now it's just a button, and somehow that is supposed to replace the moral obligation we might have. So I think there's also questions of morality that's raised. Also, it seems like a supposedly neutral camera, but yet the truth is most people are working, most people who are not, like, from the lower classes are not out on the streets during the time of the day that Google's capturing the images. So it often does capture, you know, homeless people or prostitutes. But yeah, I'm going to stop here. But if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And I'm going to be giving a tour afterwards. Thank you.
So just so you know, John has a lot of work that I have to kind of burn through in the interest of time, but these are from a series called Brand New Paint Job, which are on his website. You should look those up as well. He's also going to be doing Kool-Aid Man and Second Life tours at intermission. Please go on a tour. So this is me now, I guess. And I'm going to kind of go quickly, so if you have questions, you know, just find me later. This is just a little intro project. It's called Thugs on Mugs. It's a set of white ceramic mugs that I made through Cafe Press a while ago. It's not that captivating to me anymore, but it sort of represents this model that I like to put out there, which is sort of a translation between gift and market economies. And in that, I mean, I paid for these mugs to be made, sent them, the images came from Google, sent them to Cafe Press. Cafe Press sent me a rejection letter because of copyright. I said, no, it's actually okay because it's art. They didn't reply, and then the mugs just showed up. So, Cafe Press, big shout out. But you know, I just give these mugs to my friends, and you know, I'm not selling them, so I feel okay about that. But you know, I think a lot of times artists forget that even when they're giving things out for free, there's this like indirect strength of weak ties that comes back to you. And where I make my money in like booking nightclubs and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, I like your band, like, give this guy a mug, give this, you know, it does build relationships, and I haven't completely figured out how I feel those two worlds intersect. This is a book called 144 Darwins, which I did on 12/12, 144 years after Origin of Species was published, and I made it to kind of wrestle with the idea of where's the line between a copy and an original. Those first two images, it's pretty clear to me that one is a photocopy of the other, but the last image of the book is that, which I'm pretty sure is mine, or it's not, you know, the same work. So I just kind of did that to like illustrate that point. And when you kind of like put them all out on a line, I'll ask people to point to the place where it stops being copyright infringement, and people have a hard time with that. I'm maintaining a Twitter account right now under the name Vito Akanchi. I don't know, for people that don't know Vito Akanchi, he did a famous performance art piece in the 60s called Following Piece, in an effort to kind of like redefine what the line is, what it means to draw, and to kind of like take ego out of the picture in an egotistical way. He decided to pick a random person and follow them until they went into a space he could no longer get into. And he would, you know, document this. And one night I just I spend a lot of time online looking up domain names and usernames that aren't already registered that may have comedic effect. So when I was like, whoa, Vito's not on, well, he actually is, but it's under the name Akanchi Studio. So I just thought, because Twitter is about following, this piece, which is titled Following, was just kind of like an LOL at a very basic level. But then I started getting followed by MoMA, and people started writing to me and being like, oh, Vito, it's been a while. So I don't say that I'm him. The only thing that happens is when you follow me, I follow you back, and then you get a thing that just says Vito Akanchi is now following you on Twitter. And occasionally people will retweet that because they get the joke. So this is this is my fair use attempt at identity theft, maybe. This is a copy of the Quran, which I printed on 9/11 at a FedEx Kinko's right near Ground Zero this past 9/11. The project was called Offset Printing, and it was in response to the kind of fire that was going on about suggested Quran burnings. And in printing, offset printing is a pretty common term. And I felt really angry that, one, the press was paying so much attention to it, and that the idea of burning this document was even suggested. So I just kind of felt on a very basic level, the least I could do was print one copy. So if one got burned, well, there's still one more in the world. And it is sort of an infringement because this translation came off the USC website, and they do have a little notice up there that says, this is our translation, you can't reprint it. But I didn't really see the harm. It's not, I don't think it's deterring from anyone's market values or anything like that. This is the thing I'm doing right now. I'm sure because we're in DC, you guys know about a fire in my belly being pulled from the National Portrait Gallery. If you don't, the quick rundown is that someone from the Catholic League published an article kind of criticizing the show for its homosexual comment or content and kind of what they perceived as anti-Christian imagery in this work, a video called A Fire in My Belly. The GOP got behind it, and the Smithsonian just spinelessly caved. I mean, they caved so quickly. And in response, over 100 other institutions have shown this video. Their website is nationalportraitgallery.org. What they didn't own was .us or .net, which I now own. So on Christmas morning, I received as a gift $100. I promptly turned to my younger brother, who is a web wizard, handed it to him, and said, I need you to go mirror the National Portrait Gallery website for me. So he reproduced this outward appearance of it. It displays the video, A Fire in My Belly, and a catalog of as much press as I've been able to find about it. The press is also being documented by this site called hideseek.org. And recently this website, art.info, who's a pretty big news source for art stuff, wrote about it. And they were like, do you think this is going far enough? Is this a half-handed effort or whatever? And the critic, what's his name from Jerry Saltz from the Bravo show was commenting this is a fucking outrage. And so I was just like, Jerry, let's get coffee, man, it's cool. So I mean, these things all in different ways I think are either parody or fair use. It's never, I don't think of myself as a copyright activist. I actually don't really even believe in copyright because of its sort of philosophical, I don't know. If anyone wants to find me later and talk about Socrates' mirror riddle or Heidegger's definition of produce, there's just, I mean, Western capitalism as a system is just just doesn't make any sense. But I tried, because I know a lot of people don't want to dive into all that and uprooting the system. I just try to maintain a good sense of humor about it so that you can look at things and be like, LOL, I get it, or I want to talk to you about it without the kind of pretense of it's art and it has to be this great statement. It just kind of is what it is. So thanks, and Josh is up next.
It's a little bit daunting to follow those the other people that I'm on the panel with. In thinking about where I stand on this panel, what particular view I have to represent here, I came first to that I am definitely the greenest member of this panel. I am relatively recently out of art school and I have pretty modest exhibition experience. and that kind of like almost immaturity kind of offsets the other thing that I think makes my my presence here unique, which is that I'm a very traditional art maker in many ways. A lot of the things that I make that I consider to be my my main body of work are very conventional works on paper that I make with archival pens and preserve in the ways that art has been preserved for quite some time. There isn't, as in the case of Dan, there aren't those the stages that go into producing the works that enter through those different channels and those sources. So I'm finding myself in the position of being a little bit immature and kind of a little bit of an old fogey, too. So I guess you'll have to take my words with a little bit of a grain of salt in both directions. On the other hand, though, there's a lot of other work that I do which does directly relate to the issues that are being discussed right here. And I really appreciated what Josephine actually had to say about the potential of play. There's a lot of stuff that I do that allows me to inform my other work, which I think also has a more metaphorical and less direct relationship to the mutability of intellectual property, which is an issue that I see in fair use as being both created and inhibited by the regulation. So I thought that I would kind of start with the work that more directly relates and use that as a way to move into my, what I'm more focused on. And so, with no further ado, I too, like Ben, have a bit of a Twitter project. I have, for the last, it's close to a year and a half now, been collecting the aphorisms from Barbara Kruger's gallery work and retweeting them on Twitter. And similarly to Ben, I've gained a lot of institutional attention. The Schern Kunsthal especially, who just recently mounted a show of Kruger's work, brought me to the attention of Kruger and it tweeted all over the place, wanted me to stop this. And I haven't. In fact, I less than an hour ago tweeted Public Knowledge's Twitter and World Fair Use hashtag, and I'm hoping that my 2,000 followers will appreciate the irony. I also thought that I would, in a similarly rooted in the internet, I thought I would show you some images from this collection that I have. In the summer of 2009, I was hired by the Museum of Modern Art to execute a piece of art by the artist Roman Ondak. And every night that I worked, for those 3 months, I went back home and I opened up Flickr and I did a search for Ondak and MoMA. And I have a collection of portraits of me executing his work. And I consider this to be a thing. I consider this to be something that I should show people because I think that it ends up painting a really incisive and funny picture of what it is to individually participate and get involved in a mass cultural location like a museum, because museums are very strange places to involve yourself with art. And this project I chose to show you specifically because that is ultimately the focus of my work. I am interested in meditating on how an individual participates in a greater whole of culture as an individual. What is it like for you to involve yourself on a number of different levels in a number of different ways in culture, in high culture, in low culture, every kind of culture. And I consider this project to be kind of like a parallel outlier to the main project that I've been working on recently, which is a more focused meditation on different ways of being involved in that kind of a white cube as it's called, gallery setting. Through these works, I'm kind of forwarding a drawing technique that I developed through a number of different ways. Each piece has its own stakes, its own what it's trying to draw from the technique and communicate to people. And as a part of it, I am leading workshops teaching people how to use this technique, which here is, and the slide might be a little bit dark, but here's a detail. Well, I'm sorry that it was such a brief sight that you got of that, but I guess I'll keep on going. Basically, in all of these methods, I'm trying to organize a presentation of works that people could go into, enter into, and enjoy in all of the different ways. No, it's fine, man. Could enjoy in all of the different ways that people enjoy art. I mean, like all of the pleasure, all of the contemplation, all of the everything. But then also having involved themselves in that way, leave and feel like they could do it themselves, and feel like they could bend my ideas to suit theirs. Because ultimately, I came to the technique, which is ultimately, I guess I'll narrate it because there isn't an image there, which is an extremely intricate moire pattern that's generated through a very repetitive procedure that's relatively unskilled. Basically, I've discovered this through sort of slavishly reproducing another series of drawings that a Scottish artist named David Conner has been making for the last, I think, 20 years. Definitely, the drawings that I've been doing are mine. I don't think anyone would actually really think of them as being that derivative of Conner. But I came to realize, having studied Conner after a while, that his drawings were in fact produced the same way. He was, in his own way, reproducing the work of Saul LeWitt, who he worked for as an assistant. And so in these works that I'm presenting, that I want to to give people this gift through their experience of these works, I'm kind of pointing to myself as being third in line in a group of people who have been changing an idea, and then point forward to others who will follow me, who will change it further. And I guess that's a good place to stop. Thank you.
Hello. Hey. So apologies, Josh. I don't know what my computer did, but maybe this is.
Maybe later I can pull up a computer or something and I can show you.
I'm a PC guy. I guess this is what happens. I'm curious if anyone has any immediate questions about the work. I have sort of some of my own, but we are a little bit strapped for time, so I'd like to defer to you guys first. If you have a question.
When doing Google image searches, some of the images that you encounter are watermarks. I was wondering if that search is current to you, or work around the watermark, crop it out. Does it mean anything to affect your selection?
Can you hear me? In general, I tend to just want to pursue an idea, and I don't worry about the little digital details. Turns out, for whatever reason, most of the stuff I pursue, I don't see any apparent watermarks. Occasionally I do, but so often, I hope I demonstrated that I'm using just a tiny section of an image, and I'm like, maybe some person's face, and I'm only interested in the eyeballs. I'm just looking at the eyeballs, and I don't think I'm taking the whole image most of the time anyway. So I guess I don't concern myself with it too much.
Oh, hey.
Hey.
Do you know the work of Alvin Lucier? And if so, how has his work influenced your understanding of the role of reproduction?
It sounds so familiar, and I'm actually terrible at art history. Do I know him?
So
probably.
That's the one that I was
that
thinking
dude's
of.
awesome.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah. No, I am sitting in a room school. I feel like the work like that came sort of like in the height of like modernity and minimalism is really great for its sort of like instructive properties, and I like the idea that it's sort of you don't really even need to hear the piece. You know, you can internalize it and execute it as your own set of instructions. And I think that's something that has definitely influenced me a lot. I'm a big Silhouette fan and stuff like that. Right now, I think, yeah, I guess maybe I'll just leave it at that.
Well, actually, can I tag on to that? Is I think what you're talking about and what you're doing really relates to something that someone said on the video game panel, which is this notion that the true act of creativity is in the code and not in the art, right? And what you're doing, it seems like to you, following Lewitt and Lussier, the algorithm is the form of expression, and the artifact that comes out of that is almost secondary.
I guess for me, without being like too hippie sounding about it, I believe that the set of all possible art objects that can and will exist does already exist within a universal pool of non-sensual, undifferentiated sameness, for lack of a better term. And people like like Duchamp, when he creates a ready-made at like a random time of day, that act of like touching an object and it suddenly becomes art has this like, maybe like Walter Benjamin would say it's like a magical property. And I feel the role of an artist is, you're holding a mirror to the universe to kind of like, to shine light on new information and help things progress forward in a positive way. So when I make art, I don't really think about it in terms of like, I'm producing something. I usually just think I happen to be the first person to see it, which is, I think, why I don't value copyright, because I don't think that something being visible to me for the first time warrants my control over it. I mean, that's the problem with colonialism, and like, so maybe like to avoid the colonial aspects that plagued modernity, I just kind of like see things and it's like a tag and release. It's like, oh, this is beautiful, and I feel privileged to give it a title, but then it gets thrown back into the pool because you don't want to like deprive your friends of it. So that's the process, I guess.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, this is for John. Something I find fascinating about your work with the Google Street Views. In the old days, the big debate was if you had a mountain range, the mountain range wasn't art. If you took a photo of it or made a painting of it, that would be art. Now what you've got are assorted views taken by a robotic camera that doesn't know what it's shooting. And then you, by picking it out, have turned that into art, and thus blurring the line between, what is art and what isn't art. And this is, in my opinion, a major step forward in pushing the boundaries, I guess.
Thank you. Well, I see it, yeah, totally. I see it connected to, a gesture that's been going on at least throughout the 20th century, and that's just taking something that's there, ready-made. In previous, at the beginning of the 20th century, the Dadaist, they were taking objects, just a simple act of framing something, be it by putting it in a gallery or any sort of contextualizing something in a way that it may have not at all been contextualized prior, gives it a new meaning. So you don't actually have to do that much other than frame something to actually affect it. And in a way, and throughout the 20th century, this act of framing has slowly, the artist's hand of framing has become less and less apparent, in that it's hard to see at all where the hand of the artist is. And that was not, in prior decades maybe, it would have seemed like, you want to see the stylistic particularities, the personality of the artist. But in a way, for a lot of artists, especially in the 20th century, having your personality at all seen in the work was actually considered a bad thing, and kind of related to what Ben was saying, in that you don't want it to be so much about self-expression as in revealing a truth that exists out there, and you just requiring just the slightest change of context to make that truth that's underlying a hidden ideology may be apparent. So sometimes that requires you to take something, you know, straight up exactly how it is, even if it's copywritten, and just changing the context, and that's where the work is. But you know, it gets difficult situations. I mean, for example, my images are technically, I mean, I don't know, I probably could take the argument that it is fair use because it's being used for artistic critical purposes. But at the same time, if you look at Google's legal disclosure, it says you can't use any of their images without their permission, especially if it's for commercial. So I couldn't technically sell these images, but that raises up. Yeah, thanks.
I want to ask you guys a question just related to, I guess, licensing and stuff like that, and this sort of also maybe kind of like a philosophical thing. So this book, Post-Production by Boread, at the end he ends, one of his end quotes is saying that, you know, the artist places tools at the public's disposal. And I feel that a lot of artists now kind of take that as a given. Like if it's out there and it's been made by an artist, it's probably okay to use. I mean, do you guys feel that? Like that when you see work by other artists that you sort of have like an inherent right to be part of the conversation? And then related to that, I'm just curious how you guys license your work, if at all, if it's Creative Commons or just like, so Josh, do you want to start? We can go with that.
Sure. I guess I definitely do, I do feel that. I try not to think too hard specifically about Warrior's perspectives because I don't know, that's something I probably shouldn't get into. But in trying to allow my work to have that kind of spread and that usability, I don't license. I feel like that, I tend to feel that any like form of regulation that's like based in, that is in any way litigious is going to hinder that in some way. But I do have control over where I put the images that I place in positions where they could be stolen, and what is the nature of the images that I place there. I don't post any images of my work on Facebook because their terms of use are extremely unstable. And in that case, it's a question of implicit or explicit desire to see my images spread. I don't. I want there to be that implicit openness to them. I want people to like know in the back of their mind that they could pick this thing up and put it somewhere else. They could put it through Photoshop and turn it into something else, or whatever. But I don't want to explicitly put things places like for them to be stolen by specific individuals or specific corporations or whatever. And it's a minor particularity of mine. I don't think that it holds a lot of water. It just happens to be the way that I move forward. But then also the other thing is that the images that I make available are of relatively low resolution, and I don't think that people would have as much fun with exploiting them in ways that I think are uncreative. I think that you would really need to, in the case of the project that I was showing you, you would need to make the drawing yourself, and you could do that, and you would have this thing. Or you could like shift the variables that generate the drawing, and I would like to foster a more complete ownership over the things that I am implicitly allowing to spread through that, if that makes any sense.
How do I license the work? Yeah, well, you know, the 4 paintings out there in the lobby, I look at those and I think they're 100% original, in spite of the various sources that created them. I think the process and the journey was original, and the result is original. In fact, I've tried to sell them unsuccessfully. I do set a high standard. I think when sampling the world that my work is not derivative. And if someone wants to do the same thing to my images, my attitude is to turn the other cheek, and they can do it to my work as well, as long as it's not derivative. You know, if someone were to blatantly take a photo of it and put it online and sell it, well, that's a whole different thing. So, you know, I haven't really, I just consider the work mine, and as far as how the licensing works, I guess it's kind of the old-fashioned way. But I'm more open-minded about what people do with my work.
I guess I'll want to speak to the first part of your question first. That is, historically, at least, for artists who have used appropriation were often appropriating, let's say, like in the case of Andy Warhol, like pop iconography that was completely, everybody kind of, it almost became part of the new visual vocabulary vernacular. And for my generation, at least the internet artists that I'm kind of in dialogue with, we're often appropriating stuff made by people who are not even necessarily considering what they're doing art or advertisement, or they might be, it might just be like, you know, a blog entry or an old GeoCities website, or just, yeah, just really, it's become, rather than this kind of upward movement of like appropriating Mickey Mouse, there is this sense of appropriating stuff by people who are not artists, and then it raises issues of like you know, using something without a person's permission that's not necessarily like part of the mass consciousness. And recently there was a case by an artist in Chelsea who took T-shirt designs by this like online community that were like really much, they're not at all connected to the high art world, but they had a thriving artistic community of their own, mostly designers. And then they found out that this artist had like appropriated all these like T-shirt designs for a huge installation in New York that caused a huge controversy, and like it fostered this strange conversation between you know, there is this certain just distrust in the high art world, because a lot of people think it's like a big post that pokes at somebody's like throwing something on a minimalist, like having a minimalist canvas and calling it art. But anyways, it raises issues of like, you know, where is appropriation of like people's work without their knowledge and not attributing anything to it considered fair game in this like age. It's hard to know after I post something on a blog and I get to reblog a million times where originally it's come from. So I mean, I personally allow that as part of it. I want it to be, I kind of enjoy, it's part of the work that it becomes distributed a million times, and then you sort of, the original context of it is lost. But I mean, not everybody wants that.
Hello? Oh, we're just about out of time, but I'll just say my 2 cents on it real quick. Do you guys know about how recently AT&T ripped off Jean-Claude and Christo? Do you guys know about this? They're artists who are known for wrapping things in fabrics, and there was this AT&T ad that did that, and then all of a sudden along the bottom there was this little tagline that said that they've got nothing to do with the artist Jean-Claude and Christo, and vice versa. When I saw that, it really hit me that copyright in a lot of ways is like a set of tools authored by barons, and like the definition of it is like modified to like more and more to suit the needs of like multinational companies. And I don't believe that copyright as it's defined right now is really giving artists the defense that they need. So for my part, I've almost gone totally public domain, and I actually believe that the public domain is the intellectual equivalent of national parks. And I don't think that all artists need to put everything in the public domain, but as a closing note, I do think that like at some point in your life, if you make something and you really think it's like the best thing that you've made to date, you should put it in the public domain, because it's the public domain by definition is the only place where theft can't occur. So there's this huge reduction in crime if you just like open yourself up to sharing. So I'll just end on that, I guess, and thank our panelists for being here and you guys for having us.
Please stick around for the Kool-Aid Man Tour Second Life. You'll see a lot of art that's not created by people who consider themselves artists that I've appropriated.